There is a moment most people never notice, because it doesn't arrive with panic or drama. It arrives quietly, disguised as logic. It slips into the room when you're weighing two choices, when your hand hovers over a phone call you haven't made, when you reread an email for the 5th time and still don't send it. It doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten. It simply whispers a question that feels responsible, even intelligent. What if this goes wrong? And because the question sounds reasonable, you assume it's you thinking clearly. You assume you're being careful. You assume you're in control. But beneath that calm surface, something far older and far more powerful has already taken the wheel. Most of your major decisions don't collapse under pressure. They freeze. They pause in a kind of internal fog where time stretches and certainty dissolves. You tell yourself you're waiting for the right moment, the right information, the right version of yourself. But if you're honest, there is an uncomfortable stillness there, a tension that feels less like patience and more like restraint, like something holding you back just enough that you can't quite move forward, but not so much that you can clearly see what it is. This fear doesn't look like fear. That's its greatest advantage. It wears the face of caution, of realism, of being smart about things. It sounds like the voice that says you should think one more day, prepare one more plan, gather one more opinion. It disguises itself as maturity. And because of that, it escapes suspicion. You don't fight it. You listen to it. You let it guide your steps, slowly narrowing your world while convincing you it's keeping you safe. Think back to the last decision that truly mattered. Not the small ones you make on autopilot, but the ones that shape the direction of your life. The job you didn't apply for. The relationship you stayed in long after it stopped feeling alive. The conversation you rehearsed in your head for months, but never had. If you trace the hesitation honestly, you'll notice something strange. It wasn't a lack of ability. It wasn't a lack of intelligence. It wasn't even a lack of desire. It was a quiet dread of something you couldn't fully name. Because the hidden fear controlling your decisions is not fear of failure. That's the story people like to tell. Failure is visible, dramatic, and oddly survivable. People fail publicly every day and still rebuild. The fear that truly paralyzes you is subtler than that. It's the fear of irreversible exposure. The fear that once you choose, something about you will be revealed that can never be unseen. That the decision won't just change your circumstances, but your identity. Every major decision carries a mirror with it. Choose, and you don't just find out whether it works. You find out who you are. And that is far more terrifying than failing at a task. Because tasks can be retried. Identities feel permanent. Somewhere deep inside, there is a part of you that would rather remain undefined than risk discovering a truth you can't undo. This is why indecision feels strangely safe. As long as you don't choose, you can keep all versions of yourself alive in your imagination. The successful one, the brave one, the one who would have done amazing things if the timing were right. Potential is comforting. It has no sharp edges. It asks nothing of you except to believe in it. The moment you decide, potential collapses into reality. And reality, unlike imagination, can disappoint you. So the mind does something clever. It reframes fear as responsibility. It tells you that waiting is wisdom, that hesitation is depth, that uncertainty means you're thoughtful. And sometimes that's true. But when waiting becomes a habit, when hesitation becomes your default response to anything that might change your life, it's no longer wisdom. It's avoidance dressed in intellectual clothing. This fear often forms early, long before you had language for it. It might have started the first time you tried something sincerely and were met with ridicule instead of encouragement, or the first time you failed and felt your sense of worth quietly fracture. Or the first time you watched someone else take a risk and pay a visible price for it. Your mind learned then that exposure hurts, that standing fully behind a choice means standing defenseless if it collapses. So it learned to protect you, not by stopping desire, but by slowing action. not by killing ambition, but by wrapping it in layers of doubt. This is not the mind's cruelty. It's the mind's loyalty. It is trying to keep you intact in a world that once taught it that being seen can be dangerous. The tragedy is that the same mechanism that once protected you now quietly controls you. It decides which dreams feel realistic and which feel too much. It filters your future before you ever consciously imagine it. And because it operates below awareness, you rarely question its authority. You mistake its voice for your own. You see this fear most clearly in moments where logic alone cannot explain your behavior. When the risk is reasonable, the upside is meaningful. And yet something in you resists with disproportionate force. Your chest tightens, your thoughts scatter. You find reasons that feel convincing but somehow hollow. That's the fear surfacing, not as panic, but as friction. And the longer it remains hidden, the more power it gains. Unnamed fears don't negotiate. They dictate. They turn your life into a series of almosts. Almost said yes. Almost left. Almost tried. Almost became. And over time, almost becomes a quiet grief that settles into your body, showing up as restlessness, irritability, or a low-grade dissatisfaction you can't quite explain. What makes this fear especially effective is that it thrives on time. The longer you delay, the more justified the delay feels. After all, if you've waited this long, it must be for a good reason. The mind retroactively builds a narrative to support its inaction. It tells you you're being patient, or strategic, or responsible. Meanwhile, the cost of not choosing continues to accumulate, invisible but heavy. There is a moment, usually late at night, when the noise drops away and the fear briefly loses its disguise. It's the moment when you feel the weight of your unmade decisions pressing down on you. When you imagine an older version of yourself looking back, not with anger, but with quiet confusion. Why didn't you try? That question doesn't come from cruelty. It comes from recognition. From knowing, somewhere deep down, that the danger you avoided was not the one that mattered most. The hidden fear controlling your decisions is the fear of being fully responsible for your own life. Because once you choose, you can no longer blame circumstance alone. You can no longer hide behind potential. You become the author of your direction, and authorship is heavy. It means owning not just the outcome, but the intent. This is why clarity often feels scarier than confusion. Confusion gives you cover. Clarity demands movement. And movement, once started, changes things in ways you cannot fully predict or control. The mind, wired for survival rather than fulfillment, prefers the familiar discomfort to the unknown possibility. But here is the quiet truth that fear never mentions. Not choosing is also a choice, and it has consequences just as real as action. The difference is that those consequences arrive slowly, diffusely, without a single moment you can point to and say, "That's when it happened." They arrive as a life that feels smaller than it needed to be. Not because you lack talent or opportunity, but because you never gave yourself permission to step into uncertainty. The fear loses power the moment it is seen clearly. Not judged, not fought, simply recognized for what it is. A protective instinct that outlived its usefulness. It doesn't disappear overnight. It doesn't need to. What changes is your relationship to it. You stop asking it for permission. You stop mistaking its hesitation for wisdom. You acknowledge it, and then you choose anyway. The most courageous decisions are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, internal moments where you decide to tolerate the discomfort of being seen, of possibly being wrong, of finding out who you actually are. They are moments where you accept that no amount of thinking will eliminate the risk, and that waiting longer will not magically make you braver. When you understand this, something subtle shifts. Decisions don't become easy, but they become honest. You stop asking, "What guarantees safety?" and start asking, "What aligns with the life I don't want to regret?" Fear will still speak. It always does. But it will no longer be the one holding the pen. And perhaps the most liberating realization of all is this: the fear you've been obeying is not a prophecy. It is a memory. It is your past trying to protect itself from repeating pain. You are not obligated to let yesterday's wounds decide tomorrow's direction. Because the moment you choose, not perfectly, not fearlessly, but sincerely, you discover something the fear has been hiding from you all along. You were never meant to feel ready. You were meant to feel alive in the act of stepping forward. Even while your hands tremble, even while your voice wavers, even while the outcome remains uncertain. And that realization doesn't come from thinking. It comes from crossing the invisible line where fear stops being a master and becomes a passenger, still present, but no longer deciding where you go. The moment you cross that line, something changes in the way the world responds to you. Not immediately, not with fireworks or applause, but with a subtle shift in gravity. You begin to notice how much of your life was shaped not by deliberate intention, but by quiet avoidance. You see patterns where there were once only isolated moments. The same hesitation wearing different disguises. The same internal pause echoing through different years, different contexts, different names for the same unease. You start to recognize how often your mind tried to bargain with time. Just a little longer. Just until things calm down. Just until I feel more confident. Time in those moments felt like an ally, but it was never neutral. Time was always choosing on your behalf, slowly closing doors while you stood still, convincing yourself you were keeping options open. And the realization stings, not because it's cruel, but because it's true in a way that cannot be argued with. There is grief in that recognition, a real one, a grief for the versions of yourself that existed only in theory. The conversations you never had, the paths you never tested, the self you postponed becoming. This grief is quiet and heavy, and most people never let themselves feel it fully. They distract themselves. They reframe it as fate or practicality or bad timing. But when you allow yourself to sit with it, something unexpected happens. The grief doesn't crush you, it clarifies you. Because buried beneath that sadness is a fierce, almost forgotten instinct. The instinct to participate in your own life, to stop observing from the edges and step into the mess of consequence and responsibility. You begin to feel how unnatural it is to live forever in rehearsal, how exhausting it is to protect a self that never actually shows up. The fear notices this shift immediately. It grows louder for a moment, more creative, more persuasive. It offers you new reasons to wait, more sophisticated doubts, more elaborate what-ifs. This is often where people mistake the intensity of fear for proof that they're about to make a mistake. But intensity is not accuracy. Fear escalates when it senses it's losing control. Not because you're wrong, but because you're close. And close feels dangerous to a mind trained by avoidance. What no one tells you is that the fear doesn't vanish after you decide. It comes with you. It sits beside you as you act. Your heart races. Your thoughts wobble. Your certainty flickers. This is not a sign you should stop. It's a sign you're finally doing something real. The body reacts strongly when you break patterns that once kept you safe. Discomfort is not always a warning. Sometimes it's a receipt. There is a profound difference between reckless action and conscious risk. Recklessness ignores fear. Conscious risk acknowledges fear and moves anyway. The latter is where growth lives. Not in confidence, not in clarity, but in willingness. Willingness to be seen trying. Willingness to fail in specific, undeniable ways instead of succeeding only in imagination. Over time, something subtle rewires. Decisions still carry weight, but they no longer feel like identity tests. You stop asking what each choice says about your worth and start seeing decisions as steps rather than verdicts. This alone loosens fear's grip. When outcomes stop defining who you are, choices stop feeling like traps. You begin to notice a new sensation replacing the constant background tension. It's not happiness. It's not certainty. It's alignment. A quiet sense that even when things are difficult, You're at least moving in the direction of yourself, and that movement generates energy, not the frantic kind, but a steady, grounded force that comes from no longer fighting your own impulses to live fully. This is when regret changes shape. It no longer looms as a future threat, something you fear one day feeling. It becomes a compass, a guide that whispers which direction matters when logic alone can't decide. You stop asking which option guarantees safety, and start asking which option allows you to respect yourself afterward. The irony is that many of the outcomes you feared never arrive, and when some of them do, they are survivable in ways your imagination never allowed. You adapt, you learn, you recover. The mind is remarkably resilient when it's no longer busy constructing cages. What hurts more than failure is stagnation. What drains you more than risk is living against your own momentum. Eventually, you understand something that once felt impossible to accept. There was never a version of life where fear didn't exist. There was only a version where fear decided, and a version where you did. Control was never about eliminating uncertainty. It was about choosing your direction inside it. The hidden fear controlling your decisions thrives in silence and ambiguity. It weakens in the presence of honesty and movement. Not grand declarations, not dramatic reinventions, but small, consistent acts of choosing. Choosing to speak when silence feels safer. Choosing to act before you feel ready. Choosing to let your life become specific rather than theoretically perfect. And as you do, something almost imperceptible but deeply profound takes root. Trust. Not in outcomes, not in guarantees, but in your ability to respond to whatever comes next. That trust is what fear has been trying to replace all along. When you reclaim it, fear loses its leverage. You may never stop feeling afraid at the edge of meaningful decisions. But one day, you'll recognize that the fear no longer asks permission. It no longer controls the pace of your life. It walks beside you, quieter now, no longer pretending to be your wisdom. And in that space, where fear no longer decides and potential no longer substitutes for action, you finally encounter something honest and alive. A life shaped not by what you avoided, but by what you chose to face.